Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Conversations with Freemasons. Our first guest on this series today is Mr. Cory Turnbull. Cory, hi.
Hi, Leanne.
How are you?
Doing great, thanks you.
I'm good. Could we get a cut on the music? Cory, you are a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason.
Mm-hmm.
You just became Worshipful Master of a craft lodge.
I did.
And you are also a practicing psychotherapist.
That's right.
Okay, very cool. So before I ask you about yourself and your journey with Freemasonry, I want to ask, what exactly is a craft lodge?
Craft Lodge is a Masonic lodge, and the craft is what sometimes Freemasons call Freemasonry, the craft. It's kind of in reference back to the stonemason days when it was a guild, a craft guild.
Mm-hmm. So Freemasonry essentially evolved out of these stonemason guilds?
Organizationally, at least. At some point in their history, they began to accept people as members who weren't practicing, operative Masons. And they kind of grew from there.
Mm-hmm. And when you say operative Masons, is this in contrast to speculative?
It is.
Could you tell us a little bit about
the difference between the two?
Mm-hmm.
Well, for example, I have a friend who is a operative stonemason. Bricks, stone, patios, walls, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's operative. And when we say speculative, it means that we refer to the tools that an operative stonemason would use, levels and plumb rules and things like that, as symbols that convey other concepts that we use in everyday life.
So this would include, for example, the compass and square,
It would.
chisel and hammer. Well, maybe we can get into those in a little bit, into the symbols themselves. But first, I guess I want to ask, how long ago did your journey with Freemasonry begin? What inspired you to become a Freemason?
That's interesting. It began probably about 15 years ago, I'd say. And it was 14 years ago that I was initiated at a lodge in Montreal. And where I actually heard about Freemasonry at first was from a minister at a Unitarian church who, she grew up Jewish. She married an Anglican, I think, and, they found Unitarianism. And I had explored that as something that might be for me at one point. Still liked the system, but I remember she mentioned Freemasonry in a conversation once. I thought, what's that? And then there we are.
Okay, very cool. What is Unitarianism?
Unitarianism, or Unitarian Universalism, is a church here in Canada that was founded as a Protestant Christian church, but today they have essentially values or principles, and they don't have dogma per se. It's very much a thinker's church, if you will. So.
What was it like when you first started? Like, what is it that intrigued you the most? What was it like just going to a lodge, not really knowing anything, or did you know anything about it already?
No, not much.
Nothing.
Not much at all. I mean, I did some reading on it and had some ideas, but it was very much out of the ordinary for me. It's not something that I was familiar with in my day-to-day life. The symbols, the surroundings, the building itself, it was very different, right? So that kind of creates this air of unfamiliarity, of separateness from the day-to-day world, which actually was kind of useful, I think, in some ways. Some of my perceptions of it at the time were bang on, and some, I guess, were a little off, but yeah.
And having been a part of this for 15 years, 14 years now, how would you describe it in your own words? Like, what is it exactly?
Do you have a few hours?
We do.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Well, it's a way of life, I think, because it is by definition a system of morality, right? So it's a system of concepts and symbols and metaphors that we're to study, understand, apply in our daily life. So it becomes a way of life. And a big part of that would be the people you meet and share that journey with, right? Because we're all in this sort of self-improvement exploration journey. And when you have a bunch of people like that that get together, it makes for some great conversation.
So we've heard the phrase, a system of morality veiled in allegory, illustrated by symbols. Could you expand on that? Could you tell us what that means?
Sure. So allegory, I guess, would be the sort of stories that we tell, the narratives that we use in our ritual. It's meant to be somewhat of a dramatization of different stories from history, different characters in history. It is a system of morality because we do refer directly to morals, virtues, ethics, that sort of thing. And veiled in allegory, I'd say, where you're presented with it, but we don't tell you how to interpret it exactly or what to think about it exactly. It's meant to engage the person, get you thinking for yourself, doing your own research, coming to your own understanding, right? So, and how we point you in the direction of things is that illustrated by symbol part. So there will be symbols, whether it be on the wall or referred to verbally, or in some ways, the people themselves in various positions or places in the room might be symbolic of something. And so we're there to interpret and internalize as we will.
Well, what power do you think the symbols themselves have?
The power to engage someone in thinking with them, because if you tell someone, a sentence, say a sentence or a word, then that's all that they're going to hear. You show them a symbol or tell them something symbolic, then they're going to think about it. They'll have to research about it. They'll talk to other people about it. And they're going to do a lot more thinking and a lot more work and a lot more refining of themselves, right? And also there's the type of communication that it is, right? So it's not linear. It's something that'll speak to your unconscious, so to speak, that you'll see, and it might percolate in the background for a while before an insight comes to you later.
It sounds, to me at least now, when I think about it, it sounds very, I don't want to say Christian, but Christian in essence, because it is like, I think there's that part in the Bible where the disciples ask Christ, well, why don't you just tell people what you're trying to tell them? And he says, well, because they're not going to hear it if they understand. I have to say something that'll confuse them, and that way it'll get them thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like that idea of, was it a Zen koan or something too, or the idea of, you tell people a couple of things and then they have to reconcile to find that higher truth that reconciles the two lower ideas in a sense. So, I mean, I think that's what you mean by that. I was going to say something on that. I forget now.
Well,
because when you mentioned Christian or Christian, so I mean, it would make sense because there are a number of symbols that are Jewish or Christian or other for that matter. But we'll probably get into some of that later.
So, is it a religious institution?
No, it's an institution that welcomes people of different religions. In my own lodge alone, we have people who are Christian and Muslim and Hindu in one, Buddhist in one. So there's quite a variety of people. So everyone has and keeps their own religion as they like, right? Or not. You don't have to belong to an organized one. But it is a system that is often attractive to seekers of one form or of another.
Is there any faith or any belief that you do need to have to be able to join?
You have to believe in a supreme being of some sort, right? Now, how that's defined is left to you and your own understanding and conscience. And we specifically don't discuss religion in lodges because it as we've seen in the world, it can be quite divisive sometimes. So that discussion is just not had, but you do need to have a belief in something, and the belief in something is there for a reason. It plays a role in the understanding of the system, I think, and in our understanding of the world.
Okay, so there has to be a belief in an all power, a one power that is not specifically defined by the lodge or by the institution itself.
Exactly, and that can be quite a variety of things, right? For some, it might be a personified kind of deity of some sort, or for others, it might be this more distributed power in the universe type thing, right? It could it's open to interpretation.
So I could say, well, I guess if I were a man, and I'll get to that, but
That would be another conversation. Yeah.
I could say believe in the Force, like the Luke Skywalker Force, and that could be considered the supreme being, or does it have to be, I guess, more specific than that?
It doesn't have to be anything. There's one lodge that has a pagan, for example, which is a very different kind of relation with divine, right, than a monotheistic religion or other. So when the question is put to a potential applicant or candidate, it's, do you believe in a supreme being? The answer would be yes or no, right? If it's no, then there may be other organizations for you. But if the answer is yes, then there's no further elaboration or questioning.
There's a lot of conspiracy and, right, smoke and mirrors, I guess, around Freemasonry. Why do you think that is? Is it a secret society? Like, would you consider it a secret society?
Well, we have websites, and we're in the phone book. People use phone books anymore. It's written on the building. So it's not that secret. If it is, we're terrible at keeping secrets. But I think it is an organization with secrets in the sense that there are certain things that we keep private for various reasons, just in terms of the ritual that we do. And we'll probably talk about why we keep those secrets. But it's certainly not a secret organization. I mean, we're out there in public. We raise money for charities sometimes, and we're, visible. There's a cornerstone laying ceremonies that used to happen a lot a number of years ago, a few decades ago.
That's really interesting. What is that exactly? What is the, I guess, significance of the cornerstone laying?
Well, the cornerstone ceremony was something that Masons used to do and asked it to, I haven't been to one, so I probably shouldn't be saying too much in detail on it. It's, but the cornerstone is part of that foundation, right? That around which the rest of the structure is erected, right? So if you have the cornerstone placed correctly, then it helps for the rest of the structure to follow. I think it's part of that, getting things off to a good start. That's my understanding of it. But again, it's not something I'm very expert on.
Is it related to Jesus's saying that the stone that the builders refused?
I don't think so. I think that concept and that story even may find its way somewhere else in the system.
Okay.
But I don't think it refers to that one.
It doesn't.
I think it refers to something else.
Can you tell us what the...
I don't think I can.
Oh, okay. The secrets have begun to show.
Oh, yeah, here we go.
So then why do you think the institution has picked up this rep as a secret society?
That is a good question. And I think there might be a number of reasons for that. I think any group that has that defines its membership, right? And you have people who are in and people who are out. People who are not members and don't make inquiries authentically, genuinely about becoming members, don't know what's going on. And whatever fears they have about the society they live in, they'll project it onto this other group. We've seen that happen so many times in history, right? I don't know about these things, so I'm going to assume the worst and just project all that. Ignorance is where it begins, right?
What about, do you think it has like, well, not do you think, but does it have any, is there any credibility, I guess, to the idea of the Illuminati? Like, is that in any way connected to Freemasonry, or is that just a...
So Illuminati, as far as I know, is a group that existed in Bavaria probably 100, 200 years ago. You know, as far
The
as I know,
students,
as far
right?
as I know, they don't exist anymore. But I'm a Mason, not an Illuminati.
Okay. So there is no connection.
No.
There's nothing in Freemasonry
No, nothing at all.
about. Okay. How, or I guess, does Freemasonry inform your practice as a psychologist, as a psychotherapist in any way?
You know, I'd have to say that it does. I don't think it would be possible for it not to. And I think that's, I mean, that's a question for me to think a lot before I'm answering it too, because practice of psychotherapy, you know, is of necessity one that is evidence-based, science-based. You know, I studied science before doing that. However, a lot of the ideas that exist in psychology today can trace their roots back, you know, centuries, if not millennia, right? A lot of this stuff, like conceptually, it's not new. We just know more factually now what works and what doesn't work, in various examples. But I think where Freemasonry influences most is probably the relationships, you know, the interactions with other people, the friendships you make, the understanding that you gain into anything from organizing things to taking on leadership roles to working on yourself, all that personal work we do, right? So I think those things kind of sort of inform my thinking on the topics, and that kind of it may inform some of my conversations with clients.
So in a way, Freemasonry is a kind of a holistic spiritual journey. Just, I guess, from what I understand, it just kind of permeates everything else that you do.
In a sense, I mean, if you take on any system of ideas or system of approaching ideas, whether it be Freemasonry or a religion or a science or anything, right? It's going to influence how you think. And it becomes a set of tools that we draw on in our thinking process. Yeah, and just thinking of one other thing in there about how it influences, it's like the idea of connection that happens within Masonry. And what I see with a lot of clients is, whether it be anxiety or depression or various other issues, you know, loneliness and lack of connection is really at the core of so many people's problems. So understanding the benefits of its opposite, you know, it does inform, you know, how I see holistically how to address their issues. Like, okay, so how can we get these people finding more connection in their lives, you know, in one way or another?
So the lack of community, you think, is at the bottom of a lot of like the modern anxieties that we suffer from?
I think it's problematic for sure. And I think when people move a lot, when they are no longer in the same communities as friends and family, where they might start making a community university, then they move. They go somewhere. They might start making a community at work, then they move, or they change jobs. And, you know, living in a condo tower downtown is not the same as living in a little neighborhood, right? You don't see and have time to really, in a more leisurely way, mull about and chat with people. So I think we have to be intentional about how we create community in our lives. And I think that's one thing that Freemasonry does well. It is very intentional about creating community.
To go off of that, I know that, like I said earlier, this community is exclusive to a degree to men. Why is that?
Well, I'll go to where I know you're asking about, but I think I'll go somewhere else first, because the community itself isn't exclusive to men.
Oh, okay.
You know, because when I go to a party with a lot of the guys, their girlfriends are there. right? Their wives are there. You know, I visited with a member who was 93 years old on the weekend, and his daughter was there. The daughter's boyfriend was there. You know, they're talking with the grandchildren. So the community itself extends beyond just the members, right? But yes, to come back to the lodges themselves being exclusive. So the system of Freemasonry to which I belong, yes, it is men only in terms of members. And there are other groups, though, that are either co-ed or only women. So, for example, there's one based in France called Le Droit Humain, which has a couple chapters, I think, in Ontario, and they're co-ed. Still a relatively small group, I believe. And based in UK, there is one called the Women Order of Freemasons, and they're exclusively women. And they have a couple lodges here in Ontario as well. We acknowledge they exist. We acknowledge that they're doing, you know, what we understand is Masonry. We don't visit each other. You know, it's still kept separate, but we share some same buildings. And one of their members who came to a book club I ran a number of years ago, we talked about enough things to know that there were similarities. And she laughed and said, I wonder if the passwords and the secret things are the same. And then she said, but we'll never know because we can't tell each other. But I don't know. I always like thinking about that story.
And what about the Order of the Eastern Star? Where would they stand in this?
They're part of the regular Masonic system that was more popular in times gone by, I think, and not so much right now, though they still do exist. And that is for women who are related to Masons. So I believe a Mason's wife or daughter or something might join that one. Mm-hmm. But it's not an independent Masonic group in its own right.
Okay. So the Eastern Star aren't actually Freemasons. They're associates, like associated to.
Yeah, they're members of an associated group. That I wouldn't say that they're Freemasons. And I'm not sure how they refer to themselves, to be honest. I know the women of Order Freemasons, for example, they even call each other brother. They keep everything as identical as possible.
Oh, okay.
Even though they're women, yeah.
Interesting. And what about this secret password that you're talking about? Is it similar to...
I don't know what you're talking about.
You don't have to tell us what it is. I know you won't tell us, but is it similar to the passwords that they will be given or whispered in the Greek life ceremonies? Like I know that in colleges for Greek life students, they'll have an initiation ceremony and then are whispered the house secret. Is it kind of like that? Is there any significance to the secret itself? Is it more of a symbolic act?
Both, yeah. I think, well, all the above in a sense, because I'm not a member of any of the Greek life sort of university frats, but I know some have been created and founded by Freemasons, so I wouldn't be surprised that there are a lot of similarities. In terms of a symbolic act, I think that's where the most of the emphasis is for us, in the sense that here's something that you're not supposed to tell people. And it's left to you, right? It's like if I told someone, no one's going to know. Well, if I tell it here, someone's going to know. But generally speaking, people are not going to know. But that's not the point. I'll know, right? So you need to be trusted and demonstrate trust. You need to have a clear conscience, right? So it's all about what it means to be trusted and to be trustworthy, right? So that's part of the system, part of the symbolic act, I think. And the words are chosen for specific reasons in terms of being symbolic themselves. Yeah.
So it is most of all, I guess, above all, a demonstration of integrity, staying true to your word, just keeping the secret more so than what the secret is.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that helps strengthen the community itself? Like the idea that kind of all of us here have this little secret that we all share.
Yeah. And I think there are a lot of little things like that in Masonry, right? It helps create community. It helps create that sense of shared bond, I think. So I think you're right on it with that one.
Okay, very cool. Are Are you connected to the people like that you first met when you first started? Do you still contact them? Do you still see them?
Absolutely. So I was initiated in Montreal and I'm living in Toronto now, so I don't see them very often. But when I do go back to Montreal, I'll visit that lodge originally that I originally joined, and I'll see some of them. And before I became Worshipful Master of my lodge here this year, I wrote a letter to the two men who sponsored me when I joined 14 years ago, and had a nice chat with the wife of one of them who recently passed away. But yeah, there is something there.
Okay. So it's like the bonds you make kind of stay. They're true, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean it's like a close someone who does something really important for you and becomes a friend and acts like a friend for years. So that's going to become meaningful.
That's so beautiful. Is there?
It's a beautiful system of morality, veiled in allegory.
I feel like one of the morals already that we've touched on is integrity and trust and being trusted and being fidèle, I guess, is like fidelity, a tenet in Freemasonry.
Absolutely.
Are there others like it? Like, are there other main tenets? Would you say there are like
few, yeah.
3 or 4 or
More?
5? Could you tell us some of them?
More than 10. Which can I tell you? Let me see. So I don't want to go into ritual specifically here, but I can say that it would refer to things that are common to virtue ethics, right? So in the system of virtue ethics, we think of the virtues, the cardinal virtues, or the so it does refer to those by name.
Temperance, prudence.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All that stuff. And in addition to that, there are the tools and what the tools symbolize, as how to live a balanced, productive, and honest life. I think concepts that relate to that.
So it being so rooted in virtue and morals, do you feel like it competes with religious institutions in any way?
Well, I mean, the only way I think it might compete is compete for time. If you're in one place, you can't be in the other. But interestingly, if you're in one place, you might be more likely to be in the other, right? So there's that side of it too. I'll be honest, I hardly ever went to church until I started exploring the Unitarians at one point, and I eventually didn't go to their services much anymore. But after I became a Mason, at least once a year or more, there's this thing we call a divine service. And the past few that we've had here have been multi-faith, where we've had people representing numerous faiths. And I actually went to those. So Masonry got me in a church when I probably wouldn't have been going in one for a few years. So there's that too.
That's pretty interesting. Does the religious text play a role?
So we don't have a religious text per se that we use directly. There is one at least that is used as a symbol, right? So in Masonry we don't talk about Bible or Torah or anything else. We talk about a volume of the sacred law, and that's meant to represent whatever your book of faith might be, right? And yeah, and we specifically don't want to get into calling it any one or the other because we have members of different faiths, right?
But does, for example, the Bible take precedence over other books?
We use some stories. We use some stories as allegory. Yeah.
Would you say it's mainly from the Bible or from the older New Testament, or is it from a variety of texts?
Yeah, I'd rather not go into that too much.
Okay, we're not allowed to know about that.
Well, it's not that we're not allowed to know. I mean, you can probably Google it, right? You can probably find a lot of information. But from my perspective, I think the important thing to underscore is that whatever we do use is called a volume of the sacred law, and it's done so for a reason, right? It's meant to be this organization of brotherhood for humanity, whoever wants to be a part of it. And we do use stories. We came from a certain tradition. I mean, the people who would have been, let's say, in Scotland in the 13 to 1500s, they would have been primarily Christian. So stories that they would have been familiar with would figure more prominently.
Mm-hmm. And is that why it's referred to as the Scottish Rite?
No, actually, I think the Scottish Rite started in France, of all places.
Oh,
you know,
okay.
it wasn't in Scotland. And the ritual used today was written in the U.S. in the 1800s, I think.
So
So
why
yeah,
is it called the Scottish Rite?
I think it's a translation in the when it was created in French. Now I could be wrong on this, but there was something in French, le rite écossais, which would translate to Scottish Rite. And there may have been people from Scotland who were in France. I mean, they had a bit of an ally thing going on against England sometimes. So
Mm.
I'm not entirely familiar with that history. But the regular, what we call craft masonry, there are grand lodges that originated, in England and in Scotland, and in Ireland and in France and everywhere else after.
These were the ones that grew out of the stone guilds.
Yeah, yeah. And then once they started to form, they would create others in other countries, right? So I believe the one in Ontario was created by the Grand Lodge of Michigan. I think it was the Grand Master and the Grand Lodge people of Michigan that came over and created us.
Okay. So it started or at least in North America, but started in the US and then moved up to Canada.
Not quite. I mean, in terms of when we were created, that's like 150 years ago or something. But the earliest lodges in North America, I think, were military lodges that traveled with the British. And they had some that were stationed in Canada, some that were stationed in the U.S. But of course, it wasn't Canada or the U.S. yet, right? It was British North America of sorts and colonies and whatnot. Well, pieces of it were at least. And they moved around, right? They weren't constrained to one location. They had their charter from, England or Scotland, but they traveled with the ship they were on or whatever. There's one that I visited in Quebec City that started out as a British military lodge, for example. And I know they were stationed in New York, I think, at one point, and then in Newfoundland at one point, and then in Quebec City. And that's kind of where they stayed. And eventually, given population demographics, all their members now speak French. But although they switched their ritual to French, they do one part of it in English still, in recognition of that history where they kind of came from. So it's kind of neat to go to Quebec City and hear this part done in English.
So is the British Military Lodge, would that be considered another rite, like the
No.
Scottish Rite?
No. So for example, that ship left England, and Masons from England would have been on it, and they would have had their lodge. The most recent example I can think of would have been a Canadian lodge that operated in Afghanistan a few years back, Kandahar, I think, and I think it was simply called Canada Lodge, and it operated there for a while. Not now.
And that would be not a Scottish Rite.
It was Canadian. It was from Ontario.
Okay.
I think.
What are the rites?
So Scottish Rite, and that Scottish Rite would have from 1 to 32 degrees, only 4 to 32 practice here. Then it's what we refer to as regular craft masonry. We don't refer to it as a rite per se. There is York Rite, which would include what we call a Royal Arch chapter. So that's a different branch. So after you finish the third degree, you can take like a fourth, fifth, and sixth degree, but they're referred to by different names in this York Rite. And some people are members of that. I'm a member, although I have to admit I don't attend very often right now. I'm a member of a lot of lodges, but yeah, it's different. It has a very nice and spiritual vibe to the story that they have.
Why are the degrees numbered? What is the significance of that?
So mainly to know just to count them. I don't know. There's not really that much of a significance with the first 3 degrees. And I mean, the first, the entered apprentice, it's the first one. So it's the first degree. And then you do the second one, and then you do the third one. So I think mainly it's just the numbering. I know numbers can have symbolism, and numbers certainly do have symbolism in Masonry. But those ones, I'm not really aware of any specific symbolism that's meant to be attached to the numbering of those degrees.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that there were 32 degrees. I had thought that there were 33.
Yeah. So that's an honorary one. So the degrees that you would, attend and see as an allegory and that sort of thing, there are 32. The 33rd is not done like that. It's conferred by the group that sort of runs that rite, and it's given to recognize contributions that someone has made, whether it be to the Scottish Rite itself or to the community, and just to recognize the value that individual has and will continue to bring in the future.
And is there a symbolic significance?
33?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. What 33? Sounds familiar.
Can you tell us, or are you unable to elaborate on the symbolism behind the number?
I like to leave that to interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I think there's one that people are going to go for mostly. But
most of the discussion that I see on the internet is stuff like, oh, well, there's 33 vertebrae in the spine, or Jesus was 33 when
I hear that one a lot.
When he was resurrected, etc. So there's this connection between reaching the 33rd degree and being in your Christ consciousness. Does that have any significance in Lodge, an idea of Christ consciousness?
So that kind of thought, that kind of reflection is one that I think members would enjoy having and engaging in as part of their own interpretation. And what you said is not something that we specifically say at any time, right? But that's the beauty of symbols and allegory.
That actually reminds me of the question I told you I wanted to ask about the secrets, or if there is an ultimate secret or an ultimate symbol with an ultimate meaning in Freemasonry that one is supposed to learn. Is it supposed to remain a mystery, essentially?
You ask such easy questions, Liliane. So that is a very interesting question. And I think there are really two ways to answer it from my own perspective, and on this, I think it's probably a good time to also to say that, whatever I say is my own opinion, obviously. I'm not speaking for my lodge or for any group of masonry, right? But how I see that is twofold. One, I see the real secret is the experience that you have, right? The insight, the bonds, the feeling, just it's what you discover about yourself and what you discover about how you enjoy living in the world. And I think that's what is kind of revealed to us at some point, right? It's the secret that maybe it catches you by surprise, maybe it doesn't. But I think that's part of it. But the other part, I think, is something toward enlightenment, whatever your concept of that is. Because, I've had conversations with people in different careers and different fields of study, and I always found that, no matter where you start, no matter what field or piece of information you start with, if you follow it enough, and if you want to understand it fully, you end up having to learn about everything else to one degree or another. Right? You can, I had a friend who he said, well, what about marketing? I said, okay, what do you have to know about? And we went into things about, sound and then color and, and how, and the psychological impacts of various design. And then to say, okay, well, the psychological impact, well, how do you get there? So then we talk about how we perceive, how we think about things, the psychology of it. So then you're starting to understand yourself, because you have to understand yourself before you understand how you respond to marketing, right? So no matter where you start, you're following this path that will eventually take you to a certain state of mind, I think, and a certain state of understanding. And I think masonry can be understood as just one more of those packages, if you will, that can help you go down that road. And it's what I like about it is overall, it's a nice package. It's put the concepts together in a nice way.
So really the secret is finding yourself at the end of the day, like learning yourself through what you see, or using what you see as tools for projection almost.
Yeah. Tools for projection, for introspection, for relating, for proving. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. It's so, given that, it's also...
Can I just say that right now?
Okay.
The thing I can't get out of my mind is the number 42.
42.
From Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the secret to the universe and everything.
Right.
So that's stuck in my head right now for some reason.
The answer is 42.
Yes, but they didn't remember what the question was.
That being said, it is said that Freemasons, and again, might be a conspiracy, but I guess I'm asking if there's any truth to this. But there's this idea that Freemasons are harbingers of ancient mysteries and secrets that stretch back to Pythagoras, to ancient Egyptians. Is that true? And
Sure.
how does Freemasonry, I guess, connect to ancient Egypt?
Yeah. Well, I mean, two things I could say, sure, but not just us, right? I'll give you an example before I go into the Masonic stuff. I was in this course reading about use of symbols and dream interpretation, stuff like that. And I remember reading something by Freud, which I know you've read a lot of. And there's a concept of what dreams meant and how to understand dreams. Well, he might have said it differently, but it wasn't new. Right? I think Plato said a similar thing about dreams, right? And that was a long time ago, long before Freud. So is he a harbinger of ancient mysteries? Maybe he is. And I think just like in psychology today, we have a lot of ideas that the concepts stretch back a long way. So do we do in Masonry. We have stuff that stretches back through Judeo-Christian tradition, yes, through ancient Egypt, yes. But do we also have stuff from Aristotle? Yes. Also from the Enlightenment era thinkers, 1700s-ish. Yes, absolutely. Bacon later, maybe, or before. I can't remember Bacon's timeline. But Albert Pike, for example, who wrote in the Scottish Rite, and I know there's a lot of conspiracy stuff around him, I think, but he, in his library, he had quite a good library, and he quoted and cited and paraphrased stuff from the Bible, from Rousseau, from Bacon, from all over the place. So it was like collecting the wisdom of the time and times before and trying to distill it into that package.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. How does Pythagoras fit?
Pythagoras?
Does
Who's
he?
that? Well, didn't he just copy Euclid?
Well, I was going to ask about the Euclidean theorem, but I guess we're already there, so
No, we're not going to go there.
we can't. We're not allowed to ask about that.
In terms of math, yeah, sure.
I guess, well, what can you tell us about the Euclidean theorem and its role in Freemasonry?
What I'll say generally is that in Freemasonry, we are encouraged to learn about the 7 liberal arts and sciences, right? Math or geometry specifically being one of them, right? And back in the day, like ancient Greece, let's say, in the time of Pythagoras, numbers were considered to have power. Math was considered to have power to describe the universe. It's powerful. And for operative Masons, yeah, it was powerful. You could build cathedrals when you knew these things. But for speculative Masons, we would think more along the lines of moral geometry. It's quite a concept to think of moral and geometry together. Right. But it's symbolism, right? How can we symbolize things or encode meaning in things that are just geometric figures, right? So, and whatever is presented in ritual, we'll interpret and talk about it in our own time.
can you tell us more about moral geometry?
I need to learn more about moral geometry.
Ooh, okay.
Maybe you can tell me about that sometime. But I think it's an interesting concept. And I literally have a task in my Google Calendar right now, learn more about moral geometry. No
it.
joke.
Does it have anything to do with what we call sacred geometry?
I would say, yeah, similar lines, I think.
So can you define it for us? Like, is it, for example, having a shape to represent each moral idea, or?
Yeah, shapes can represent ideas and values and even states of mind.
So, for example, the compass and square. Why a compass and square?
So if I told you much about that and what they mean, I would almost have to be telling you part of the ritual in order to explain it. So I'll just say, Google it. If somebody else put it out there, go read it. But I'll refrain, I think, from going there, because I know I would go down that road of probably quoting ritual and explaining it.
And so ritual, when you say ritual, this is like I guess, would this be the like holiest essence of the entire sort of institution or the community? Like, is this the heart of what is done in a Freemason lodge ritual?
A lot in that question. So the heart of what's done in the lodge, I'm a big fan of the connection. I think the heart of what's done is actually the people in the room. And I think the ritual serves as something to get the people in the room, and something for them to do, and something for them to think about. But they're the heart of the essence of the thing. But that said, in a more practical sense, the ritual is usually meant to refer to doing the first, second, and third degrees, and just how we formally open a lodge or how we close the lodge, right? So how we basically say it's on, it's open, or it's closed and we're not doing it now. So there's a very formal process for doing that, just like calling a meeting to order, right? But a lot more elaborate.
So ritual is essentially for newer members.
That is such a good question, actually, because it's yes and no, right? I think, and I had this conversation in Lodge actually recently, because in the sense that ritual is for new members, it's to create an emotional experience. It's to point people in a direction, right? It's to convey some information, which frankly will go by in a blur, because when you hear something the first time, what are you going to remember? But you'll read it again later. So it's for new members in terms of the impression, and to give them that common experience that we've all gone through to become a member, right? It's part of what defines a Mason, right? You've had those experiences. But it is for the older members as well as for everyone there in the room, because part of how it works is, repetition. You see it today and think something. You see it tomorrow or next week, you think something else. You see it 10 years from now, you're looking at it from a different perspective. You think about something else. So it's something that it's food for thought continuously. And through repetition, we kind of internalize the values as we're exposed to them. It's like social learning would be a concept in psychology for that, right? Well, one among many that's applicable, I think, there.
Is ritual where the symbols come together, like to play a certain role or kind of come to life? Could you say that?
Come to life, yes. And in that it comes to life first in the mind of the person studying it before they perform it, right? So when you memorize something, and let's say you're memorizing something that's maybe would take 10, 15 minutes to say, you're spending a lot of time with that, right? So you're really integrating it into your own thinking and, absorbing some stuff from it. So it's kind of coming alive in you first. Then when you're joining with a bunch of other people in the room, It's coming alive in that interaction in the room as it's performed. But then it's also coming alive in the people who are just sitting along the sidelines watching. So it's kind of coming alive in them as well. It's right. It spreads. Ideas move through it. But the symbols are also not just the ritual. Their symbols are also in the room, on the wall, on the ceiling. Things that you might wear, place where you might stand. It's all symbolizing something. So I think the attention one gives to the symbols brings them alive in oneself.
Can you tell us what some of the most major or central symbols are?
Well, I mean, you mentioned the square and compasses earlier. That's a well-known symbol of Freemasonry, and it's one that we would, use very publicly too, right? I mean, people have bumper stickers and stick it on their car with a square and compass. A lot of guys will have square and compass rings or, hats or whatever. So those are probably the most prominent and public of all the symbols, I'd say.
What does the G stand for?
So what came to my mind immediately was the sentence in the ritual where we define what the G stands for. So, and that's spelled out very clearly. And today in general, I'm just erring on the side of not saying ritual as much as possible. But I can say that it varies, whether the G is even there or not varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And I think some of it has to do with language and what starts with G. And one language might not in another, right?
So would it be a D in French?
It might be.
You'd be saying it, but not saying it.
How tricky. So I think it's safe to say that in North American context, in English, the G would stand for God, but it would have another reference as well in Masonry. It would be another word too.
Can I guess?
I'm going to say I can neither confirm nor deny the correctness of that response.
Right, I'm not going to bother.
Yeah, but interestingly, in some other countries, like in Europe, for example, you won't see the G there. You'll just see the square and compasses. My guess is probably because of so many different countries and different languages in such close proximity. G, D, whatever else.
So it is language specific, like that G is English.
Yeah.
Okay, we're getting somewhere.
She's making inroads. Don't tell anyone.
What about the chisel and hammer?
Tools.
How can we interpret them? Like, if we're going back to the idea of operative and speculative, in the operative sense, the chisel and hammer is the stonemason's tool for making the stone a building block, right? To smoothening it. How can we interpret that in a speculative sense?
So I'll answer your question without telling you exactly the phrasing of what they're defined as meaning. And I'll do that by adding in a bunch of other tools. So you're getting a bonus with this answer. And that is, we have this idea that we are, a rough stone, so to speak. We're rude matter. We're material to be shaped as individuals, right? And the tools of masonry, as an operative mason would use them to get the stone into a particular shape and polish it up so that it looks good and, might be more useful or look better. I don't know, a number of things like that. But we use the speculative tools of masonry in a way that improves us, gets us into shape, makes us more useful. It makes us, builds our character. So all the tools represent specific attributes that we would cultivate in ourselves.
Okay, so the chisel and hammer would be in reference to an aspect of the self rather than something to be used on an aspect of the self?
I would say an aspect of the self.
Okay. And as aspects, it's like, I guess what I'm asking is, are we using one of our faculties to hone another? Or are we using, say, if we're interpreting, and I'm going with the idea that, the symbolism is open to interpretation and it teaches you about you. So
it's open to interpretation. However, the stonemason tools are given specific definitions as to what concept they represent.
Okay.
How you use those tools in your life may differ from one person to another. And there are ways of going about things, right? So in general terms, there are ways to find balance in life. There are ways to be productive and improve and make, progress in your life. There are ways to relate to other people with, honesty and integrity and such. So there are those kind of conceptual tools, ways of doing things.
And you're not able to tell us.
I might be able to get away with it, but I'm going to stay away from ritual specific stuff as much as I can.
Okay, so this would be as well ritual specific, like the meaning of the chisel and the hammer.
Yeah, and I mean, there are things that we are specifically, that are like the so-called secrets, whatever words and whatnot, that it is clearly, something that you don't tell. But there's a lot of stuff in the ritual that you might have bits here and there that are public anyway, and that one could probably easily speak about. But I think it's for anyone interested in Freemasonry who might be joining, I think a lot of that stuff is best discovered through the experience of the ritual itself. And things are explained to you and shown to you in a way that is meant to create an experience. So I always err on the side of not spoiling it.
So you would say that part of the meaning of the symbol is the journey towards understanding it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
That's really interesting, because I usually when we're talking about symbolism, like say on my page or on one of my lives, and someone will ask Masanan, well, what is the meaning of the star tetrahedron, or what is the meaning of this image of Baphomet? And I always feel at a loss, because it's like, well, I mean, I could say as above, so below to you, but what does that even mean? Like you need to...
I think if someone takes the path of educating themselves on meanings that were attributed to symbols in various times and places, and in understanding, what someone might have meant in a particular historical and, context when they were creating the symbol, given what they would have known at the time, you get an idea of what meaning they were trying to create and put forward to communicate. That said, we understand symbols. We can understand it intellectually in that matter, but you can also look at it and just look at it. What does it mean to you? What is it triggering for you? And that's part of the experience of getting something from it.
Yeah, and I feel like symbols aren't meant, I guess, to be intellectually, just purely intellectually understood, defined. This equals that. It's more of...
Otherwise, they could have written words.
Right. That's true. It's almost like a prompt or a tool or something to have in your pocket, almost to meditate on the journey, as part of the journey.
Like a tarot card use, for example.
Right.
You look at it and what does it bring to mind? It comes back to this idea of projection again, right? What is my unconscious projecting there to bring to my intention that I'm seeing now consciously? The dialogue.
On the note of tarot cards, do you use tarot cards? Are you familiar with them? And do you know how, if at all, they are connected to Freemasonry?
I don't know of any connection to Freemasonry, though I think in my early 20s I had a bit of a pagan phase, and I bought a set, like a deck, at this little store called Mélange Magique in Montreal, and I still have it. And I'll take them out once in a while, but it's quite rare that I use them. But once in a while I do take them out, and I'll use them as that contemplation tool, right? Like, what am I seeing here? What's coming to mind? And I'll think, okay, so why is this coming to mind? Yeah, and I find it useful, okay, because we don't have enough tools and prompts in a daily life to have a dialogue with our own unconscious, right? Unconscious by definition is not conscious. We're not aware of it, right? So unless we're doing some kind of a meditation, like I used to do like a yoga nidra, for example, like you're kind of asleep, but you're also awake. It's almost like the hypnosis state of mind, right? So, and even then it's not quite the same. I think anything where we have those visual prompts that we can dialogue with, they're useful.
Do you think that's related to the fact that religion doesn't play as large a role in our lives today? Like, do you think that, say, people who were more religious, earlier societies, were somehow more connected to unconscious in that they called it spirit or soul?
I don't know. I think that's a difficult question to answer. And I think it would probably depend quite a lot on how any of those individuals experienced and lived their religion, right? Because we can certainly think of an individual who practices it in a very social manner, goes, socializes, and it's a place, it's a community. There's someone else that may say, okay, so these are the rules, this is what I'm told, this is what I'm going to do. Okay, it's instructions. Someone else may find deep connection with the divine and may really delve into it in that way. And that's different as well, right? So everyone's going to have their own way. And I don't know if we have less of all three of that today or not. And interestingly, Freemasonry is is in such an interesting space, if you will, because it, like a religion would encourage, we also encourage contemplation. We encourage people in that growth and journey. But also, like the Enlightenment thinkers, we also encourage you to think for yourself. It's your journey. What do you think? What's your interpretation? Because we're not going to tell you. So it's different in that way.
It sounds almost mediative, between this intellectual aspect and spiritual.
I never thought of it before as mediative, but I think that's a great word for it.
You wrote your master's on the connections between psychology and Freemasonry. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. That was a lot of fun, to be honest. It was it was a personal project, and initially, and I wasn't even sure that I was going to work in psychology, let alone but what I decided was there was a lot about Freemasonry that I found interesting, and I found the whole system is such a good package. So I thought, how does this work? Why does it work? And what is it doing exactly? And I had a bit of a science background before that, and a bit of, logical, analytical thinking type approach to things. And I thought, okay, so I want to understand this more analytically. So I found a university that I could do a bunch of courses and had a good dissertation period to work on. So I actually contacted them before I even applied. I said, can I do my dissertation on Freemasonry? And I pitched them the idea of what I wanted to research. And they're like, yeah, okay. I'm like, great, let's do it. And what I did was every course and every assignment and paper and everything in every course was a lens through which I sought to understand Freemasonry. So I looked at it through the angle of social psychology, through the psychology of learning, and psychology of personality, of oh God, I can't even remember all that now. It was so much, but all these different areas in psychology, and I started looking closer and closer at certain themes that kept coming up. And we touched on one a bit earlier about trust, right? And that ended up being the theme of my dissertation, was on trust, morale, and sense of belonging. And what I ended up finding, to skip to the end, is that the three are related. You know, there's correlation between all three of them, and they all influence one another. You increase one, the other two go up. You know, and it works for all of them. So when people have trusting relationships, they're happy. They have more of a sense of belonging, right? If they feel they really belong somewhere, they trust people, and they're happy. If they're happier, then they trust people, and so these three things interact with one another. And Masonic lodges do a good job of creating. Well, they do a good job of it when they're working well. You know, when they're successful, they work well in creating this bond of trust, and people are being happy spending time to each other, and they have a sense of belonging. And this has so many impacts on our life, right? And quality of life. It influences learning, because when we trust people, we learn better from them, whether it's in Masonry or teachers, and you know, we learn better from them. There were studies done on the decrease in sort of trust and social capital and loneliness and whatnot, showing it to be as detrimental for health as obesity or smoking, right? So it provides that belonging, which is an antidote for that, which is an increasing problem in culture these days.
Wow. So
it helps with our health. It literally helps people be healthier in that regard. So it helps in the way we think and judge, right? One of my ideas was that our attributional style can shift. An attributional style is how we think about things and how we think about the causation of things, right? So if someone does something, you think, oh, that jerk, you know, it's like you're judgmental, you're judging the context, and not only judging the context, there's a cognitive bias where you're judging the person based on that one behavior in that one context, right? You're giving a label to the individual, attributing a character trait instead of just the behavior. So some elements in Masonry encourage us, you know, take a step back, give the person the benefit of the doubt, you know, understand more deeply, right? Cultivate that patience when relating to other people. So it encourages us to refrain from those initial judgments, to dig a little deeper, to relate a little better, right? And that can shift our attributional style, not just with our brothers in Masonry, but with everyone else in our life, right? So it leads to more compassionate understanding, more accurate understanding oftentimes, and it keeps us away from those quick, reactive responses or fear-based responses, which is quite helpful. There's a guy that was doing some good research in the U.S. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, NGO, like Nyo, I think it is. But he did a lot of work on that sort of attributional style and like the neuroscience of it. So I was looking at a lot of Freemason concepts and behaviors through like a neuroscientific angle, which got very interesting. But yeah, I could keep talking about that for a while. I even lost track of where it was going.
Please keep going. It's so interesting.
But it was a lot of fun to do that degree though. And it prompted me to do another master's in psych afterwards in practice. But I think I came out of it more reassured and more impressed by the Masonic system than I even went into it, because I had such a deeper understanding of how it actually worked. And I found this quote by a well-known Masonic author, W.L. Wilmshurst. And I think it was there in 1924. He wrote something to the effect that a Masonic lodge is successful in as much as it facilitates the transformation of its members, right? As much as it is able to really encourage that personal growth, that's where the success is. That's how it's defined. And how it's successful is literally what I was researching. Is it through social learning? Is it through a type of different way of shaping our attributional styles? Is it through interpersonal stuff? Is it, and it is a lot of those things. It's a combination of a lot of those things. It's quite genius, really, the way it's all put together.
Is there any explicit connection of it to alchemy or the alchemical process?
there's an interesting one. So starting point, I don't know. Starting point two, there are ideas about that. So some people have spoken about, let's say the Rosicrucians, for example, and the story about, what they learned and where they got it from and all that. And then the things that were published and when they kind of became public and whatnot. And who may or may not have been a Rosicrucian in that time period, right? So I forget whether it was Newton or Descartes. Maybe Descartes. There was speculation. But I don't think he ever publicly admitted to it, but who knows? But at any rate, there were, it was purported that some of these people in the Rosicrucians had joined Freemasonry at some point in the early days of it and brought a lot of the alchemical symbolism and ideas of theirs into our ritual and integrated it into ritual. And knowing some people with who are much better versed in alchemy than I, hearing them speak about the alchemical symbolisms and interpretations that one could make about different elements of the Masonic Lodge and its ritual, it is quite interesting. Mm-hmm. It is quite interesting. But I really can't say whether it was put there intentionally or one with that knowledge can really make a good interpretation of it after the fact.
Mm-hmm. Because just from what you were saying earlier, in terms of how it's related to psychology and its effects on our attributional style, you said mm-hmm. it was called, mm-hmm. It's almost identical to the alchemical process, especially as interpreted or reworked, reframed by Jung. Mm. And as a psychotherapist, I don't know how much you've studied Jung, but do you see parallels or echoes of Jungian thought in Lodge? Or
there is some. Some people have. There is an author. I think it might have been Hogan. I can't remember exactly, but there was an author that wrote a book on called Psychology of Masonry, something to that effect. And I think he took a primarily Jungian approach. And in his book, he even, I believe it was him that mentioned the officers, like the individuals in different roles themselves represented certain things, like certain archetypes, for example, and other principles. But I personally don't take that interpretation of Freemasonry in terms of those roles being archetypes and whatnot, because I think that's kind of a real post hoc. You're looking at something with ideas that came about more recently.
It's reductive.
Yeah. So reductive. Yeah. Thank you. So it's not the approach I take in understanding it. I don't think that was the intended way those things were put there. Alchemy is more likely, Mm-hmm. But I think if you take other concepts from Jung, you can use it in your own interpretation of things. Mm-hmm. How you understand it. And and other psychologists as well, right? You can just pick one that you like and you can use it as a lens to useful effect, I think.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, now my mind is going into tangential spaces, but I
know the feeling.
I'm thinking now that you say other psychologists, and I'm thinking about the Lacanian symbolic realm, like what role that plays or how that's connected to the idea of symbol in ritual and symbol in Freemasonry. Because I know Lacan's conception of the symbolic is really the linguistic, right? Or the linguistic reality that we eventually step into in our development. Do you think how do you think, if at all, these things are connected? Or
well, I wish I got through my reading list before you asked me that question, because I know a psychoanalyst who takes a Lacanian approach as well, and so it ended up on my list of things to read, which I haven't got to yet, unfortunately. But in terms of Freemasonry as a symbolic realm, yeah, absolutely. And what was the rest of your question? I was so thinking about that psychoanalyst and his Lacanian approach.
Well, I guess whether the Lacanian symbolic, like as one of the three. They're the imaginary or the real, the imaginary, and the symbolic. And I'm wondering if the ritual space in Lodge has a, I guess, connection to the way that Lacan separates these experiences of reality in our stages of development. Like, do you return, say, to the real or to the imaginary when you're in a ritual?
The first thing that comes to mind was I had a prof in law school once that said the answer to every legal question is it depends. And I think it's the same thing with some Masonic questions. So I was having a chat with a friend after Lodge one night about our experience of something that we did a little differently. And for me, it was one thing. And for him, his description of it was completely different, right? There were some common elements, but it was clearly a different experience for him than it was for me. But we both enjoyed it for different reasons, right? So I think that different individuals, or even the same individuals in different instances, we can be more focused on different layers of reality, shall we say? Where we can be focused on whether it's the social or our own psychological or the intellectual, analytical, or just this meditative kind of spiritual vibe. We can have very different experiences of the same ritual at different times. So yeah, it's a real big. It depends, I think.
So it kind of goes back to that whole, the idea that it's kind of all a projection at the end of the day. Like you're projecting something onto the ritual, the experience that makes it your own.
Phenomenological comes to mind.
Phenomenological.
Phenomenological. It is an experience, and I don't know if I would say it's all projection, but I think it's a lot projection, right? But I think some of it is pre-projection, right? It's a mental experience before we're projecting and interpreting, because that's so blended up, the before and after. What is before and what is after, right?
I was going to ask.
Oh my God. That's a rabbit hole. Yeah, so I mean, it comes down to it. Ritual experience is just that, is experience. The degree to which we are the observer in that moment versus being carried along as a participant. How much are we just observing ourselves? How much are we a blend of conscious and unconscious, interacting and engaging with the moment? I think that there are so many nuances that one can get into there. That's why the phenomenological came to mind. I can pronounce that properly. But exactly. But that's why that came to mind, right? And that's something that I did study and approach that I quite liked in terms of doing some research. I mean, one can say Gestalt is another one, right? It's that whole, like, what's coming into the foreground for you at that given moment, what's in the background but still there.
Can you define Gestalt for us?
No. Can anyone? I don't know. It's one of those things like postmodernism. What is it really?
Right. Something that Jordan Peterson likes to talk about a lot.
Yeah, I don't think he likes it.
He likes to trash it. Sorry.
But, the whole and the ground of reality, if you will, your experience of the ground of your awareness of the ground of reality, maybe. It's, can we perceive everything at once? Maybe in some like physiological way, but not consciously in terms of the attention of awareness.
Is there like a golden proportion that one might aspire to achieve?
In what sense?
Between, say, their conscious and unconscious state, their observer and, I guess.
See, I think that ventures into the area of different people will have different goals in that regard. I think it depends what you're looking for in the Masonic experience and what you put the effort into achieving. Because I think, achieving that balance, or a balance that you specifically want to achieve, first of all, how do you know what the balance is going to be without like playing around with it a bit, right? deciding on it and the how-to is going to be all in the individual's interpretation and study. And I think lots of conversations with, in many locations, afterwards.
So you wouldn't say there's like one universal golden standard?
Like in ritual symbolism or just in general?
I guess both. I mean, I'm probably more asking about
maybe and yes.
Okay. So maybe there is one in ritual symbolism?
I personally think that there is one that is pointed to, and that I personally think that there is a symbol that represents it. But that's my interpretation of it. But I think there's enough there to substantiate my interpretation if that's what's intended.
Can I ask about a potential symbol that we, I guess, have been told is meant to represent, I guess, a golden standard or golden proportions, or I guess without any prerequisites, I just want to ask about the significance of the Temple of Solomon.
The Temple of Solomon, it is part of an allegory that's used, right? So maybe the temple itself means something, but there are certain elements of it, of its design, for example, that would have meaning. There's even an element in one version of the allegory that certainly historically didn't exist as an architectural element in the actual building, but yet it's mentioned. Why? So it's an addition, and perhaps it's that was done so for it to stand out as, okay, so why was this added? But yeah, there is symbolic significance to the different elements of the building, and it all fits into an allegory, and the building of it itself.
Right, that's what I was going to ask about. Like, would the builders of the Temple of Solomon be these, I guess, almost the ideal stonemason the ancestors, like the ancestral guild being the builders of Solomon's temple?
Now, depending who you ask on that question, you might get very different answers. I think for some people, symbolically, maybe. And I think for some people, they may wonder if there's a historical connection even. It depends on how far you want to, take that thought into the past without, lots of historical evidence. Right? We can suppose, we can guess, we can look at commonality of symbol, but that doesn't prove that there was a commonality of lineage of any kind. If anything, anyone that comes after can pick a symbol from the past, right?
I was gonna ask, like, do we? Because from what I've read, there's like a whole controversy around whether or not the temple existed, whether Solomon's temple existed. But I'm guessing that in Freemasonry we are taking the existence of the temple as historical fact, or does that not play a role?
We don't even discuss that, whether it was or wasn't. Really, it's used as an allegory, like anything else. I wasn't aware of that controversy about its existence.
It's probably just online stuff. Like I Google something and, there's somebody who's upset about it. So
yeah, I try to stay off the internet as much as I can.
So really it's symbolic importance is what matters. Whether or not it was real is not really a point of discussion.
Doesn't matter in terms of the symbolic significance, right? It's an organization of symbols, and there's symbols that are meant primarily for psychological effect. So whether something existed in reality otherwise or not, it doesn't necessarily impact that aspect of the masonry.
I'm just wondering if I can outright say it, or...
Well, you may not need to, because how it was built in terms of any political or economic system at the time, shall we say, wasn't really relevant to our allegory.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We talk about architectural elements and individuals more than anything.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I wanted to ask about, I know that like I've heard about the element of sound and the fact that, can I say this?
That there wasn't any?
Yeah.
Of a certain kind?
Right. Not a sound was heard, or like not.
I think I heard something about that.
Okay, so we can't get anything from that. I wanted to ask about the symbolic significance of that, this absence of sound. Is it like a matter of that the builders worked with this utmost perfection, that there was just such detail? Is it symbolic of being so specific and aware of what you're doing that not a sound needs to be made?
So all of what you said would be what someone would ask themselves after being exposed to an allegory. Mm-hmm. And then you would start looking it up and you start reading and then you start thinking. I don't have an answer to it that comes from Masonry itself. Mm-hmm. But as one likes to do, we could have those conversations and find answers that we like together. Right. That's what I like about all those conversations in lodge. Right. It's not unlike this conversation in a lot of ways. You talk like, I think this, or do you think that? Maybe I wonder. And then you look up things, you learn things, and that's the fun of it. Mm-hmm. I think we can think of anything in Masonry as our own mind and body, especially our mind, right? Or our character. Mm-hmm. And any tool or concept we have in Masonry, the goal of the system really is to apply it to yourself, your building, your refining, right? So whether you're thinking of a temple or a stone or anything else, it's it's just a way of talking about yourself.
Okay.
Now, if I only had a few Masons here to disagree with me.
How long have we been going? An hour and a half? Really? Ooh.
Oh, that flew.
So I'm just realizing how much darker it is now.
I was noticing that. I'm like, I wonder what time it is. But I really don't care.
I'm trying to pull all these answers out of you. There is a symbol that appears in the tarot in the High Priestess. And this is specifically in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Mm-hmm. And the High Priestess is sitting in between two pillars, a white pillar and a black pillar, and they have the letters on them, J and B.
If this is out there in audio only, I'm smiling. Yes, that is interesting.
Can you tell us about the J and B pillars?
They are pillars with letters on them, and I find them very interesting.
Yeah, no. We know that they stand for Yakin and Boaz. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about their significance in Freemasonry or in the temple, as understood by Freemasonry?
No comment.
Why can't we know about the pillars?
For me to give any meaningful explanation would require me to dip into things that I shouldn't be sharing.
More ritual stuff?
Yeah.
Why can't we know about the ritual?
Okay. So there are a couple of reasons, right? So I mentioned earlier, or alluded to earlier, that part of the experience of ritual is the novelty, right? And part of it is about, the shared bond, in-group, out-group. How are you defining yourself, what you know, and what you talk about outside and what you don't. And I mean, there's no real secret per se that's going to, be very interesting or important to most people, right? It's almost playful in a way, but again, it comes back to this idea of trust about what you're going to say and what you're not going to say, and it's kind of fun from that perspective.
Just to have a secret?
Yeah, of course. Oh, I know something really interesting, but I can't tell you. We're like kids in a way. But yeah, there was a good book. I can't remember the author or title, but it was something published by Harvard a few years back on ritual and the elements of ritual. What makes it intense? What makes it effective? You know, novelty is one of them. Intensity is another. Repetition's another. You know, there are very specific psychological tools to enhance an experience. And I think just things being new and having a little bit of a surprise here and there is part of it.
Mm-hmm. I did want to ask, as a psychotherapist and just in terms of psychology, what do you think, or what would you say is the significance of ritual in one's life in general?
Oh, that's a big one. You know, I've known people who have, who've had, you know, upsets in their life, things that destabilize a person, whether it's a big move, someone passes away, a divorce, you know, something that really upsets your routine in your life, and you call into question things sometimes. You have to make sense of the world and your life in a new way. Now, the fact that someone has gone to the same place like once or twice a month for how many years and seen the same ritual over and over and seen the same people, you know, and it creates constancy. It creates something that's stable and regular, that's still there, that doesn't change regardless of what else is going on in your life, right? And I think it can provide some people an anchor in a time when it's needed, right? So that it's useful. But it's more than that, right? It's a tool for making teamwork necessary. You know, whenever you have to put on a ritual, you have to have a certain number of people involved to make it happen. So you have to work together on it, you know, and you have to know it well, and you have to work on it because you're kind of accountable to the rest of the team. You don't want to let people down because you want to do it well, right? And you want to do it well because the candidate's going to have a better experience, and it's just more meaningful all around. So it then starts playing into, you know, being social, being accountable, challenging yourself, learning. You know, I didn't like speaking in public when I first joined. I remember telling someone I would rather vomit than speak in public. I can't stand it. I was not good at that. But let's say 10 years in, I had memorized a piece that was like 15, 20 minutes long and just, you know, no problem. Very comfortable delivering it. That was a big change, right? Mm-hmm. So it takes a person out of their comfort zone in a number of ways. Yeah, I mean, so many things. I've often thought that a number of my clients, if they just need a lodge, they, you know, if they would honestly just, if they would join something like a lodge, you know, or lodge for that matter is, but I can't unfortunately direct people into lodge for therapeutic purposes, although I think it'd be quite effective. But they need community. They need something to give themselves to. They need to have others giving of themselves to them, right? They need that. And if they had that, a lot of those problems would evaporate.
Mm-hmm. So, given that this is mainly for men in terms of the ritual, lodge, etc., how could, say, women find a similar space to engage with these symbols, with the ritual, etc.?
A couple of things come to mind right away. One is Women Order of Freemasons. I can give you a contact number. Plug for Jennifer. There you go. The second thing is, would the same space be the best space for women? I don't know. In terms of the ideas and the symbolism, absolutely. I think, you know, you find it very interesting, and I love talking to you about it. But would being in a group of, let's say, you know, 30 to 80 women talking about this, is that something that would work for you the same way that it works for men? That's a question I can't answer. My sense is, in general, that it wouldn't be the same. It might be good, but I think it might be a little different. You know, and there might be a number of ways it might be different. But one role I think that it does play is it provides a space where, firstly, men can feel that they can relax and be themselves, and they don't have to perform in any way right? They don't have to perform, either out of politeness or perform their version of masculinity vis-a-vis the woman that's around them. Some might censor some things that they might say in the presence of women, right? That's not going to be happening as much. And culturally, it has happened oftentimes that men don't always open up as freely or, as emotionally or vulnerably with each other in some spaces. Some clients I work with have never done that, right? They've never had a meaningful conversation or an emotional one with another man, until therapy. And then after therapy, they start, well, maybe I could talk to my best friend so-and-so about this. And then they do. And then they have a great conversation and they wonder why the hell they didn't do it before, right? So happily, what I'm seeing is a generational shift with that. I think, and here at least, in like 40 and under or so, big difference. Big difference. But for a lot of guys, they haven't been comfortable with that. Masonry creates a context and prompts for meaningful conversation where people sooner or later do have more meaningful conversations, more vulnerable conversations. And it also puts them in different roles, because when you have a dynamic, if there is a woman with a group of men, oftentimes the woman will easily go to the more the understanding role, right? A mediator or more compassionate. Not always, but can often adopt that easily. If there are men who struggle with that and they're put there and there is no woman to do it for them, suddenly one of them has to do it. Right? So it gets some of them out of their comfort zone into areas where they draw on more of that nurturing aspect of masculinity. And it is there.
So it's like they are forced to tap into their own femininity in the absence of a feminine figure.
You could say it that way, but I still see it as a different aspect of masculinity that's just not always been expressed, right?
That's interesting.
Because I think, because I think masculinity isn't just this, traditional rigid thing that it's sometimes made out to be. There are so many elements to it, right? It can be a caring thing as much as it can be a strong thing, right? And you can call that masculine, feminine, or you can just call that, different parts of being a man, being a mature, confident, relaxed, man. Yeah, different ways of being.
So you would say that, like, sort of masculinity, the masculine can be self-contained rather than us having to say that it is a masculinity informed by a certain amount of femininity. Sure. And I guess vice versa.
Sure. But I mean, masculinity and femininity, right? When we're using them in that sense, they're words. We're using them to describe traits. And there are, you can think of a woman who has traits that, we would call masculine, and man, you can have traits that we can call feminine. Why do we have to call them either? So I think I often look at an individual and think, okay, what is the full development of this individual? What is the potential of this individual? How are they going to grow and develop in the most balanced and fulfilling way? And that encompasses a lot of things, right? Sometimes you need to be, assertive or strong. Sometimes you need to be flexible or caring. We can all draw on all these things. So why do we have to attribute them to any particular word, gender? It doesn't matter. And I think once we start doing that, then we start limiting the range of our behaviors and the range of our expectations of behaviors. And anyway.
And essentially, we can be soft and vulnerable in our masculinity rather than...
But not all the time.
Right. Or assertive in our femininity.
Sure.
Rather than bringing the assertion from the masculine. Yes.
I was just going to say, like, to that point, there is often studies saying that, guys talk more and better and have these conversations better when the conversation is incidental to some other activity. You're playing sports, you're playing pool, you're working on a car, like you're doing something together as a task and you're talking, right? So awkward silences, you're focused on something else anyway, so it's less awkward. You're focused on the other thing. That's why you're there, really, but you're having a conversation. right? So, and I think that was around people who are uncomfortable with it in the first place. I don't think it actually has anything to do with men learn better or talk better incidental to a task. I think they do so if they're uncomfortable having the conversations in the first place. If not, you don't need the object or game or whatever it is.
In which case, that could be similarly true for women if you're just uncomfortable talking to someone.
Absolutely.
Do you, in terms of your patients and clients, is it equal? Like, do you work with both men and women, or do you like have more of one gender as opposed to the other?
Yeah, I do have both, but I do have more men as clients, and that's that's a result of essentially how I present my practice. My initial aim was essentially to get guys who never have or don't go to therapy to get them to go. And I've targeted that specifically. I even have one section on my website. If you drop down a tab, it said, "My girlfriend sent me," because I had so many people that, "Oh, my girlfriend told me I need therapy." I'm like, "Oh, really? Why is that?"
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, I hear it a lot. And, a lot of times guys will come on their own, volition as well. But I think one of the statistics that really got me thinking early on when I was thinking of practicing was, over 80% of clients in therapy, generally speaking, are women. 80% of suicides are men.
Wow.
How's that for a stat?
That's insane.
It's horrible. It's horrible. If that many women are going to therapy, great. But why are the guys not going?
Because they're killing themselves.
Right? They should. I don't want them to kill themselves.
Right.
I really don't. And that's why I'm targeting them, essentially. That's literally my thought process in the beginning was like, okay, guys, I need you to stop killing yourselves. So come to therapy. Let's talk about it first and don't do that. And I hope it works.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is, though?
So I think there's a few things there. I think historically, men have tried to have this idea that they can do it themselves. They can fix their own problems. They don't need anybody else, right? There's this independence thing. Whereas, culturally here, at least, women have generally been more likely to talk about feelings and emotional stuff with friends. Guys bottle it up a lot. To the point that, when screening for depression, a lot of the stuff that's asked about is actually biased towards detecting it in women. Because in guys, often it can present itself as anger and irritability, substance use like drinking, right? So people think, oh, you have an anger problem or you have a drinking problem. No. You have a depression problem because of these things you're not addressing. So we end up having to take a different approach to screening, first of all, and then to treating and designing it right. But to get back to the why part, there's, I think it goes back to the independence thing and self-sufficiency and the stigma of having to talk to people. And that's the element that most, I think, research and people focus on. But I personally think there's another one. I think the profession overall has a bit of a feminine bias now. I think that because 80% or more of the therapists are women and the clients are women, and almost all of the profs I've had are women, and when I'm in a class, I'm sometimes the only man in there, sometimes one other. I think that it's very much a female perspective of what is mental health, a female perspective of what people need to do to get better, right? And I think for guys it's different, depending on their own version of masculinity, their own cultural background. There's a whole bunch of variables, obviously. But I think for guys, it is a bit different. They often appreciate, being able to talk about something logically first before getting into emotions a bit later. They sometimes prefer, I'm looking at Nick over there. I'm like, how would I talk to Nick about a problem? Logically, I'd start there first. No, but I'm kidding. But, and also oftentimes a more, a vibe like it's a friendly conversation and less clinical, less the I'm here to help you and I have the answers to your problems, and a lot more like all right, so what's going on? Let's figure this out. Right? Equality. Because already the idea that you have to get help from someone else for problems, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. It's like, let's not look at it as help. Let's figure it out. And obviously I have the background to know where I want to take the person in the conversation. But agency is important. And I don't think it's given the attention that it needs when working with men sometimes.
That's really interesting. Because what it makes me think about is like, well, is it because a man will feel like he is less of a man because he needs help, say, because he needs to go ask for help, or because he needs to talk to someone?
For some guys, yeah. I have one client, for example, that calls me his life coach. I don't care. Just keep coming.
That's so cute.
Yeah. And I even put on my website, I actually got certifications in life coaching as well. So if he wants to say I'm his life coach, I'm his life coach.
Nice. That's
what it is.
Is there a big difference between a life coach and a psychotherapist?
In scope of practice, yes, there is. So if I were strictly a life coach, there are things that I would address and deal with and take on. As a psychotherapist, I can take on more and take different approaches, right? But if I'm a psychotherapist, doesn't mean I can't do life coaching, right? I can do all that too.
I feel like psychotherapy would probably inform your life coaching in a really great way.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of life coaching training actually uses CBT, like the cognitive behavioral therapy approaches as well, and like hierarchies of needs and all this kind of stuff, values and whatnot. So it definitely is informed by psychotherapy. But being a psychotherapist gives us a much bigger toolbox, and we can be much more focused, but still do life coaching like stuff, or call the therapy life coaching. Who cares what you call it? Right? Seriously.
Yeah, I get what you mean, and I just feel like that the psychotherapy itself just gives you more tools and probably a better ability to know where you want to take the person, because like you said, you're able to make an assessment in the beginning as to, okay, what does this person look like fulfilled? What do they look like whole? And I need to draw a map sort of to help them get there.
Yeah. Sorry, my mind was wandering on that. I'm like, I wonder because I do have a few clients that take that coaching approach. And I should mention that I do have a few, because I don't want to, if ever my client if one of them hears that, they'll think, I'm the only one. I'm the one he's talking about. No, you're not. Sorry, now we can continue.
That's so cute. So we are treading on 2 hours now. Okay. We've taken a lot of your time. I'm thoroughly enjoying this.
Same.
And I've been trying to trick you into telling us things.
Not possible.
Right. It hasn't really worked out. But I do want to ask, there are some questions from the audience that I have written down.
Okay.
And one of them, I've already asked some of them. But one of them is about how the current political climate is impacting Freemasonry, if at all.
Okay. And by current political climate, is there something in particular they had in mind, or?
I'm not sure. They didn't specify. This was the question was how how, if at all.
Well, I don't know. I think in order to answer that, I would need to know, what element of the climate the person has in mind, and even with that, I would say it probably would vary from one individual to another, right? How they're going to perceive it. Think for a second. Like in more global terms, maybe.
Like as an organization, I think.
As an organization.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, Freemasonry itself has to be non-political, right? So we don't get involved in politics, period, as an organization. But as individuals, I think people's idea of what they need might change from time to time, right? Now, Freemasonry itself has been seen as very different things in different times, right? Some people and sometimes have seen Freemasonry as very progressive, right? Because we had people of different religions coming together talking when that was really not possible in some places, right? So, and in some ways, in current political climate, if you want to think of like gender identity and stuff like that, it's very talked about now. So, I mean, there are trans members, there are gay members, it doesn't matter, right? So that's...
But like trans men, women who transitioned into men.
Correct, if they identify as a man, because it's a fraternity, right? So,
and trans men are allowed.
Yeah,
in.
yeah, I know of a few instances of that happening. And other people will see Freemason, and some people might join Freemasonry, think, oh, it reflects my values, I like this, whatever. And other people may see it as conservative because there's a lot of tradition, there's a lot of history, and they see that kind of stuff and like, oh, I like that because it represents stability and continuity, like these conservative have ideas, right? So I think different people will respond to any particular, climate, differently depending on their own, sense of what they want in life. And if they find that in Masonry, then they can, because, we certainly have members from a variety of political, orientations like any other group would have. One thing I will say I've heard a few times in the past number of years is that, and even with some clients as well, I think sometimes guys might feel a bit on edge sometimes in conversation, that sometimes they're not sure what they can say anymore. And it's not because of any ill intent. But I think some people have, there's some people that are very quick to judge and make a lot out of something that could just be a simple mistake or misunderstanding, right? Just because someone doesn't know everything that's important to you doesn't mean they're mean or don't like you, right? And I think people who are very well-intentioned and sensitive to this in their own conscience feel some anxiety about that. And I've worked with some clients on that topic, right? And I know a few people who sought out Masonry, like, okay, so there's only men there. I don't have to worry about what I'm going to say and if I'm going to offend somebody. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but still be respectful. That's what we're about, right? So, but, speak your mind. And it's private. It's in theory not judged and whatnot. And if something is thought to be, not appropriate, then it's a gentle conversation of like, okay, so what's this all about? And we talk about it. So I think that might be a little bit about it. If someone is thinking that, it's an all men group and there's a backlash about, against stuff and the news and whatever, right. I think, that may be where they're coming from. It's not that. And that's not really welcome in that sense. It's when you have a fraternity that's built on, tolerance and like diversity historically, don't think you're going to find, any kind of negative space there. From, people I've talked to, like women in the lives of men in Masonry, like generally they think it's been good for them.
Is there a good amount of enrollment and are there younger members? Are younger members welcome?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You have to be 21 to join. So no younger than that. And I remember thinking like, okay, well, the moral reasoning part of the brain is not fully developed until 25. So why is it not 25? But anyway, we'll give you the benefit of the doubt for those 4 years. But yeah, we do have younger members. In the lodge I belong to, for example, the bulk of the attending members now are, I'd say the new guys are mostly in the 30s and 40s. Some have joined in the 20s, but 30s and 40s are probably the bulk of it right now. There have been some lodges in the past that, for whatever reason, they, were not thriving and maybe they weren't doing much outreach in different ways, or they weren't producing or providing a really quality experience for people. So either they didn't join or they didn't stay. And maybe those lodges don't have many younger members. But there's certainly several lodges around that have a lot of younger members. I was at one last night. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess some of my, closing questions would be, would you encourage, say, young people or young men that are interested in learning about themselves or in, just creating community or in finding community? Really, what kind of person would you encourage to consider joining or visiting a lodge? And how could one do that if they wanted?
Okay, so if someone wanted to improve themselves, different aspects of life, if they wanted to do that in a context that's very social, then they might really enjoy it. Excuse me. They might really enjoy it. And they can do that by reaching out to a lodge if they know where one is. And if they don't, every province in Canada, every US state, and a lot of smaller countries, they all have what we call the Grand Lodge, right? The sort of the central organizing body for that area. And you can find one either just by Googling, whatever your province or state is, plus Grand Lodge, and you'll find it. And if you want to make sure it's part of, the overall recognized system, I think the best way is probably to go to the website of Grand Lodge of England. And they have a section on there where they have the recognized lodges, by geographical area. So for Latin America, North America, Africa, wherever. And if it's on there, there'll be a link literally to the website of the other place, and you can follow it and be sure that it is the real deal.
Mm-hmm. Is it true that you need to be referred by someone who's already a member, or can you just apply?
Join. You can just apply. When I first joined, I had no idea how to find a Freemason or where the building was even, although it's a giant building on one of the main streets in Montreal. Like, how did I miss it? I don't know. But very obvious. At any rate, and I went to school like 2 blocks away from it. Anyway, it's embarrassing. But what I did was I found the Grand Lodge of Quebec and sent them an email or contacted their website or something, and then they referred me to a place that was near where I lived, and I told them where I lived. They didn't know, just in case people are conspiracy theorists out there. So I told them where I lived, and they said, "Oh, this is near there." And I went and had lunch with some guys, and it went from there. The referred part probably comes from the fact that you need 2 members to sponsor you to join. So when you fill out an application form, you need 2 people to sign off saying, "Yeah, I recommend this guy." And we encourage people, if you don't know anyone, it doesn't matter. Go get to know people. A lot of lodges these days are having people come out to dinner and having, talk to them, get to know us, we get to know you, and you'll see who you hit it off with. You have an affinity, you just feel like you're hanging out with a certain person. Ask them to be your sponsor. There you go.
So it's like a vetting process almost, just to make sure that you're genuine, or?
Well, both ways, right? Both ways. So we're looking for people that are sincere and interested in joining. We're looking for people who we think will get something out of it, and that they're not looking for something else, right? We've had someone looking for networking. Well, no, we said, well, there's other groups to network. This is not about networking. You'll meet a lot of people, but you'll meet people for other reasons, like for personal growth and for friendship, not for furthering your business interests, right? So that's important. The person looking, though, will be vetting us. Like, is this the right place for me? Do I feel comfortable here? Do I want to hang out with these guys? Maybe I don't.
Right.
But maybe I really do.
Are they actually as cool as they say they are?
Oh, cool. I wouldn't use that word all the time, but maybe some. Actually, no, definitely some. Yeah.
You're pretty cool. Nick is pretty
Oh
cool. Lucas is cool. That's 3.
Well, Nick and Lucas, I don't know about me. I don't know.
Yeah. You're cool. Nick says you're cool. And Nick
If he says so. He's the arbiter.
Right. I forgot to ask this earlier, but could you just explain to us where the free came from? We know that, as we said earlier, the Freemasonry developed to some extent out of the stonemason guilds.
Yeah, medieval guilds.
Yeah. And where did the free?
Free to travel, essentially. Free to work in different places. So in the stonemason guilds, Masons would travel around Europe mostly, and they would be, building castles or cathedrals or whatever they were building. And they had to essentially show like what today would be, the card that an electrician or plumber would have, that they would be certified or something, right? That they met certain standards, and they would have certain similar ways of recognizing and proving that. So they would be free to travel around, cross borders, and it was in the interest of all these countries. Well, if they were even countries yet, I don't know. Some of them, kingdoms, let's call them. They were free to travel around because they were needed to work in different places, and they had the benefit of that freedom of travel. The accepted, free and accepted came later, when non-operative Masons, like just an ordinary gentleman, wanted to join, and they were accepted as a member.
Okay, so the original Freemason is a stonemason free to travel. Then a free and accepted Mason is free to travel but is not a stonemason.
And we're all free to travel now, though. Well, mostly within certain restrictions.
Right. So there aren't any more, I guess, stonemasons, technically. I guess all Freemasons are Freemasons?
Well, Freemasons are Freemasons, but stonemasons still exist.
And are stonemasons Freemasons?
No. Except, well, I know one is. Or two. I know two, actually.
But they're not
They could also be, electricians or teachers. Doesn't matter.
Right. They're still the free and accepted.
They're still free and accepted. Well, technically, we're all accepted these days, for the most part.
Okay. Do you publicly identify as a Freemason? And are you supposed to, like, is that okay, or does it not matter?
I often do. Like, I wear a ring. I'm not wearing it today, oddly enough, but I often wear a ring with a square and compass on it. I don't have any bumper stickers or anything. I just think they're tacky. I won't put the bumper stickers on my car. But no offense to all the Masons with your bumper stickers. Enjoy, but not my style. But I do. I've read Masonic books on a bus or whatever before. People will ask me questions or something. Where I've worked in the past, I've told colleagues I'm going to lodge tonight, kind of thing, and I don't hide it. Some people choose to keep it private. Some people choose to tell people. It's whatever they're comfortable with. I find sometimes some newer Masons don't tell people right away because they're still getting kind of comfortable with it themselves. They're still learning about it. And they're kind of nervous about, what if someone asks me questions? I don't know what I'm talking about yet. Right? So they want to take some time to get to know it first so they can answer things before they start telling people that they are. I will say, though, for some people that if they travel regularly to countries where Freemasonry is not really welcome, they may not want to be too public about it. So that could be problematic. But other than that, it's fine.
Why do you think there is this tension sometimes, I guess, between religion and Freemasonry?
Quite some time ago, I think it was the Catholic Church in particular didn't like Freemasonry because, they controlled everything in Europe for such a long time. Controlled everything, people's way of life, what they did, what they thought, So, well, to their credit, I think a day off like Sunday was their doing, But other than that, I'm not a fan of being told what to think. So, since they wanted to control everything, they had to be the ones telling people all the information and having people, look to them and go only to them and such. But as soon as you have a Protestant Reformation, you have different churches, and then you have people, you have a place, and there were Jews in Europe as well, right? So all of a sudden you have these groups of people like say, hey, Christians, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, come hang out. Uh-oh.
That's a problem.
That's a problem. We don't want these guys getting along. What's going to happen? Oh my God, they might even end up being democratic.
Oh no. Are they liking each other?
Yeah, now they're going to start vote and being civilized with one another. And
no one's going to buy the weapons.
No, terrible. So yeah, we got along, and I think that's mainly what the church didn't like. And part of it was competition for time. I think they felt, and and there's stuff written about this, that they wanted people's time. They wanted them to be loyal to them, to the exclusion of all else, right? As soon as you're starting to spend time with other people and do other things, then you're a threat to that complete control and exclusion. But you know who does that? Cults.
Right.
You know,
Church is super culty. That's what it sounds like.
well,
Or at least the Catholic Church of the time we're talking about.
At the time we're talking about, right? They're not going to tell you what to do like that today. You know, they have they've changed a lot, thank goodness. But there are some groups today that do try to have that control over the people. Like I have on my reading list a book on helping people to get out of cults, because I have clients that I'm working with, literally, that are leaving cults, or some religions that are less mainstream that have very cult-like practices. It's so controlling, so controlling. And of course, these same ones don't like Freemasonry either. And they don't like a lot of things. They don't allow their members to vote even sometimes. They don't want, that's a whole other story.
It's so crazy because a cult is something that Freemasonry gets called.
I know,
right?
That's hilarious. It's dangerous in a way because it shapes people's ideas about us. And do we want to spend time countering that? And how do we go about doing that? But you know what? People who think about groups they don't understand and don't know about in that way, and have various conspiracy theories, they don't respond to logic anyway. It's no point, because no matter what you say, they'll say, "Oh, you're just saying this," or "Oh, you don't really know," and there's no dealing with that. So we just don't deal with that.
Yeah, there's really
What are you
no
gonna
point.
do?
Yeah.
No.
I guess it's the secrecy most of all, the fact that there is stuff that remains behind closed doors.
People don't like that, I think.
But even though the doors are kind of open to anyone if they would like to join and be in on the secret.
Yeah.
Of course, if they're men, in most lodges.
Women's Order of Freemasonry.
Right. Yeah. No. What about if
they're not that far away?
What if you're non-binary? Well, what happens then?
Oof, that is a good question. Because these institutions being established centuries ago, it was a binary world.
Right.
And that's how they began, and that's how they operate.
Do you think they'll ever reform in a way to suit new ideas about gender?
I think one thing that did impress me with Grand Lodges currently, though, is the idea of trans people joining. You identify as a man, okay.
Yeah.
For our purposes, you're a man, join the fraternity. I think that's a rather progressive approach for an institution that is like 300 to 500 years old. That's flexibility.
That's true.
They may not even have thought of non-binary yet. Actually, that's not true. I know some that have thought of that. This is very true. Actually, that is interesting. Actually, I know of a member who does identify as non-binary, but he came to that conclusion after joining.
Oh.
So I don't know. I don't know what that would be like. But that's a question for another day. If someone presents that way and has the conversation, then I'll have to. As merely a newly minted Worshipful Master, this is above my pay grade. Although I'm not paid at all. Although the wages of a Mason are the friendship we make. So I'm paid it so well. But yeah, I mean, let's say I did get an application or something from someone who identified as non-binary, next meeting. What would I do? Like, okay, I'd explain, okay, so fraternity, men, but I'll look into it. We have a Grand Lodge for a reason. There are people there that make these decisions. They have the resources to get consultations with whoever they feel is necessary to help them make these decisions. And I think that's what they did when they accepted trans people, right? And they made the decision to allow it. I would leave that to them and trust their judgment at this point.
If it was me looking like this in my own energetic state and physical state.
You look like a woman.
Yeah, I would probably, even if I said I was non-binary and I don't identify as a woman, I'd still be told like, no, you're too much of a woman to be allowed in the space. It's going to shift the energy.
I think it would, though. I think it would shift the energy.
Yeah.
I mean, in theory, every individual shifts the energy, regardless of gender, right? But I think gender-wise, you would shift the energy of that room. And the issue there is that you're not identifying as a man, right? So As a fraternity, it's for men. And I think that's important, because if it's designed as a space for men or male identifying, then that's who it's for, right? So women are not there, and I would assume that non-binary may not even want to join because it may not be the space that's best designed for them. But who knows? I'm not going to determine what's best for them, right? So I think those are conversations that'll be that we will likely have to have at some point.
I'm wondering if there might be a non-binary lodge in the future, which would be...
I don't see it.
Cory, thank you so much for joining us today, for answering all these difficult questions.
And for not answering
and
some
for
of them.
dodging.
Yes, you're welcome, Elliot.
For dodging the more difficult ones. I guess, do you have any questions for us? Is there anything that you'd like to sign off with, or?
No, nothing comes to mind. It's been great. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too. It's been longer than we expected. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today at this conversation with Cory Turnbull. Cory, thank you for teaching us so much today about Freemasons. Hopefully we can talk again and I can try and pry some more mysteries out of you.
Best of luck.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again. A huge thank you to Mr. Gloom for all this beautiful equipment, and to all the patrons of the Twitchiverse for supporting us and letting us make this series. Really, I'll get better at this. All right, goodbye.